in the 1970s with paper, but it was a very complex system. On those big computers, you could send simple text messages, maybe 120 character text messages. But I was challenged and asked to convert this entire system of about 140 different parts into the electronic version. And I wrote 50,000 lines of Fortran code as a 14-year-old kid. Here's some of the code. Named that system email, a term never used before in the English language, and no one had ever created a system. And then it was reported in the local newspaper, you can see 1980. And I ended up winning one of the in those days they had, they still do call the Science Talent Awards. It was called like the baby Nobel Prizes for high school students. I won one of them for the invention of email, okay? And this was reported. And then I came to MIT, and I'll come back to this. So I created email, the system as we know today as a 14-year-old kid. In fact, when I came to MIT, it was reported, this is the front page of the official MIT newspaper, that out of the 1,040 students, that we had the student who created the first email system. So everyone knew about this, okay? And I was elected, I was very interested in activism, and I was elected the student body leader of the freshman class at MIT. And I was invited to the president's home, the president of MIT. His name was Paul Gray. Paul Gray was on the science council of the White House of President Reagan at the time. And he was saying, you know, it's too bad that you cannot patent software inventions. You see, no one even knew what software was in 1980 or 1978. It was so new, people thought people were just writing stuff. You could patent the iPhone, but you couldn't patent software. But Dr. Gray said you should copyright it because in 1980, the law had changed where you could use copyright law to protect software inventions. Again, my parents weren't lawyers, they weren't wealthy. I had to write away for the actual, in fact, I have a copy of it. I had to write away for what's known as the copyright forms, fill it out as a 16, 17-year-old kid. You had to go back and forth, and you had to submit all your code, right? Which means I was going to make my stuff public. I wasn't trying to protect it like Steve Jobs, only, I was fine sharing it with the world. In fact, when I was writing all this code at the university, Hewlett-Packard came in, IBM came in. I would do presentations to doctors as a 14-year-old kid. So that was, so anyway, I wrote away for all of this. And after many, many iterations, on August 30th, 1982, a 17-year-old kid gets issued the first United States copyright for email, recognizing me as the inventor of email. There is no controversy here. I named it email, wrote the code, and I have the actual documentation, okay? The question is, why am I not on every stamp in the world? Why isn't this known by every child in the world? And we'll get to that. Why is it when a brown or yellow or white kid thinks about who's an inventor, they always think about white people? We have to ask that question. I never played the race card, and you'll understand why, okay? So anyway, did that, but I wasn't interested in public relations. My parents didn't have PR people. I was interested in medicine. I was interested in systems because what I'd witnessed in India, right? So I didn't get a PR agency to promote all this, okay? But I did learn about systems. You see, email was a system. It was not just exchanging text messages, which goes back to Samuel Morse. I had created the system as we know it today that all of you use. When you log into your email, you see inbox, outbox, folders, right? You don't see that on WhatsApp. You don't see that on Facebook. It's a system. And it came from the interoffice mail system that I was the first to create in the world. All right. So that's what I did, right? I created this, named it email. Now, when I came to MIT, I was very interested in medicine. Remember, MIT is a #1 technology and science institution in the world, right? People get Nobel Prizes out of MIT. So, by the way, I didn't even know about MIT until 2 weeks before I applied. Give you another area of sort of nonsense. Here I am, the #1 kid in math, #1 kid in everything in this high school. You would think someone would say, hey, Shiva, you should apply to MIT, right? No one told me about that. The way that happened is quite fortuitous. my mother would always help people. She had helped these two women who she met at the shopping mall who'd been thrown out of the home because they had some dispute with their husband, whatever, and they needed a place to stay. They're basically homeless. So my mom, I mean, we didn't have a big house, but we had a bedroom downstairs. She said, you could stay there. And one of them had a friend who knew I was good at math, and he came over and he said, you should apply to MIT. And I said, what's that? And he showed me the picture, and it said Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I thought it was a mental institute because the dome, it looked massive, and I had no interest in applying. But he wouldn't leave until I applied. So I took a pencil and I just did it for fun, and I applied, and I got accepted. And then I came to visit MIT, and I thought these people look crazy. You see, I was into athletics, I was into sports. My dad had taught me to be like a Renaissance person, right? It was mind and body were important. The people at MIT looked nuts, they looked unhealthy, and I had no interest in going. But my high school then said, you should go. And I realized why, because they get points. They get different ratings if they send a kid to one of these schools. But eventually one of my teachers said, you should go because you like Boston. It's a city. It's considered the Athens of the world. It was the only reason I came. So I come to MIT and I was interested in medicine, but I realized that the way that these institutions were looking at the body was not as a system. They saw it as parts, right? And something never gelled in me. In fact, I was accepted to the MD PhD program that they have between Harvard and MIT, and I couldn't do the MD piece, right? Something in Western medicine didn't feel right in my gut, right? So I ended up going, because they see the body as parts. And in fact, what I learned was that the entire pharmaceutical industry is what all of this is based on. But more what I realized was that Western medicine, if you remember the story of Buddha tells a very famous story of where a king brings 6 blind men in and an elephant, and each blind man touches the elephant, right? And they all have a different view of the elephant, right? The guy who touches the tusk thinks it's a snake. The guy who touches the snout thinks it's a snake. So this is how science is done today, right? They don't see the whole elephant, they see the parts. And if they were to get together, you'd get something like this. So my journey was I went in and out of MIT. I did 4 degrees in engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, design. I actually have a degree in architecture out of the architecture department. And then because I did whatever I enjoyed, and I started 7 different companies. I created another company to automatically analyze email and route it. That came out of me winning a competition for the United States White House. I built that into about a $250 million company. So I learned how to be an entrepreneur, but I would always go into MIT, come out, do a company, go in, and that was my thing. But something happened in 2003, something quite fascinating. In 2003, what happened was a revolution was taking place in biology. And by the way, just to give you sort of step back, so there's this one journey I had through science, but when I was at MIT, I was an activist. There's a guy called Noam Chomsky. Some of you may know of him. Chomsky is considered, I think he's the most cited person in science. So I wanted to understand how systems of power worked also. Why was there a caste system? In fact, at MIT, I organized a completely revolutionary newspaper to organize the students. We organized the food service workers. We protested against the war in Iraq. We did all sorts of very cool things to help the students and people. We made sure more poor Blacks, whites got into MIT, right? So I was always an activist. In addition to being a scientist and engineer, which is the truth piece, I was always fighting for freedom and obviously very, very interested in aspects of health. So all those things were always part of me: truth, freedom, health.